You're welcome back. You're still watching Business Morning on Channels Television. New analysis by Oxfam finds that 13 out of 15 International Monetary Fund, as the IMF loan programs negotiated by developing countries during the second year of the pandemic, require new austerity measures such as taxes on food and fuel or spending cuts that could put vital public services at risk. The IMF is also encouraging 6 additional countries to adopt similar measures. Well, the perspective of Oxfam is that the IMF and World Bank are providing finances but are failing to tackle inequality. We have the country director of Oxfam, Dr. Vincent Ahonsi, joining us virtually from Abuja now to give us a clear picture of what Oxfam is saying. Good morning, Dr. Ahonsi. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me.
Great. So help us to understand your perspective about saying that the World Bank is providing financing but failing to tackle inequality. Help us to understand that.
Thank you so much. What we have found out as Oxfam, as a responsible international non-governmental organization, is that in Africa, and especially in Nigeria, if you look at the inequality, what do we mean by inequality? The gap between the rich and the poor, the ability for people to be able to feed themselves, and the non-ability or inability of other people not to be able to feed themselves. That is what we simply mean by inequality. The gap is very wide. And when you talk about Nigeria, the gap is so astounding. It's unbelievably high. The rich are very rich and the poor are very poor. And Nigeria is home to millions of individuals that live below the $2 a day. Now, that is what we mean by inequality in a layman's language. Now, we all know that before the pandemic, African countries have problems, especially a country like Nigeria. The health system was nothing to write home about. The educational system was almost in shambles. The public services, the public infrastructure, like power supply, like roads, were nothing to write home about. And a lots of Nigerians were living in poverty. Now, the pandemic struck. And when the pandemic struck, Nigerian systems were unprepared for it. The health system was unprepared, the economic system was unprepared, the social infrastructure was unprepared for it. And after the pandemic, even during the pandemic, we noticed that it was affecting disproportionately the people that come from poor countries, the women, the children, and the people of color. They were disproportionately affected by the pandemic. First, humanity was able to develop what they call the vaccines. And the vaccines were only made available to people from the Western countries, the rich countries. And most of the people that were in the developing countries did not have access to it. And the people who have access to it, who have the technology, refused to share. As if that was not bad enough, they needed funds to be able to see how could we live through this pandemic. And therein came the multilaterals like IMF and World Bank. And what did IMF in particular do? IMF went to the European countries and said, look, your recovery is very important. You have to recover from this pandemic. Please do not implement austerity measures so that you do not endanger your recovery or the welfare of your populace. Then IMF turned around again and faced Africans and said, look, you are special people. You know, you are people of goodwill. You are very unique in everything. But we have facilities to help you. We have loans to help you. But on the condition that you will take these loans, you now go back to your countries and you start implementing austerity measures. And these austerity measures include, number one, you have to increase tax, especially a tax like VAT that affects the common man on the street. You have to be able to remove subsidy on petroleum and petroleum products. You have to remove subsidy if there are on agricultural products, remove subsidy on power, and of course, cut your spending on social infrastructures, cut your spending on empowerment programs, on social good and on social welfare. We said, look, thank you, IMF, but this looks like a double standard. Why do you ask the rich countries not to implement austerity measures, and you turn around and ask the developing and poor countries to implement it? These are countries whose populace are finding it to feed themselves. These are countries where even to have a daily human needs is a problem to the people. These are people who have no access to quality health care. These are people who are withdrawing their children from schools. These are people who have no access to the vaccine. And these are people that are affected by climate change, because the African continent is more affected by climate change more than any other continent. And at the same time, you are now encouraging their countries or their governments to now lead the people to their Golgotha. We say, this is not the right thing to do. This is not fair to do.
Okay, Dr. Ahonsi, so I guess it's now up to economies or states, nations on their own, since, I mean, they're all independent. Nigeria is an independent country, to either accept the condition or not. So eventually puts responsibility on the government to look inwards, you know, and explore the resources available for the good of their people.
Yeah, I think what you say resonates with me, but you also know that when you say countries are independent, how independent are countries that are independent? The world is no longer, it's now a global village. Like you said during your former conversation, what happens between Russia and Ukraine is reverberating all over the world. So a country in Africa cannot just say, look, I am independent. So I mean that independence is like quote and unquote. Then I also agree with you that they should be able to stand and determine their fate. That is what we all pray for. That is what we all hope for. But do the governments have the political will to do it? Do they have the will with that to do it? Are they ready to do it? That is another conversation in its entirety. But what we are saying, or what we are advocating for now, is that African countries need to say no to these austerity measures. People cannot be going through so much hardship, so much poverty, so much inequality. It is easy for us to sit down in our comfort zones and say, oh, after all, Nigeria has been existing for long. Nigeria will sit through this. Many of us don't really know what is happening out there on the streets. I asked somebody yesterday to get me just a bag of pure water. And they said, this is what used to sell for 5 naira in Nigeria. They said 3 is now selling for 50 naira. How many Nigerians can afford it? How many Nigerians can afford to put their children in school? How many Nigerians can afford to pay for their health care when we don't have universal health care coverage? This is what we are talking about. The IMF has a moral obligation to Nigeria and to Nigerians. You cannot have millions of Nigerians going through so much excruciating poverty, going through so much hunger, going through so much sickness and disease, without access to COVID-19 vaccine, with all these dilapidated roads all over the place, with all this power supply that is probably 1 hour in a day in some instances, and a government that spends less than, or maybe an average of 5% of its budget on health. You want them to cut the budget further. You are just asking Nigerians to go to their Golgotha.
All right, so
country where you have the... Yes, please.
So one of your suggestions, Oxfam, is you recommend redistribution of income and wealth through progressive taxation. And somebody's asking, what about just expanding the tax net? Have we done enough with that before we start talking about progressive taxation?
The tax system in Nigeria, I think if you talk about looking at the tax system in Nigeria, yes, you have to, you expand the tax net, like you have said. But who do you want to expand it to? That is the first question. The question is, those who are poor now, those who have no jobs now, those who have nothing to eat now, are they the same people you want to tax? I don't think that makes economic sense, or that makes moral sense. The other thing is that you look at the people that are the artisans, the small and medium enterprises, the little small-scale entrepreneurs. These people are already being taxed and double taxed and overtaxed. If you open a little shop in Ajangbadi today, you will see that the next morning the local government officials are there. One, they are there to tell you have to pay for your radio, pay for your lockup shop, pay for, and before you know it, you have about 10 or 12 other different taxes that will be served on you. Are those the people we will still want to tax more? No. We need to expand it, but we need to expand it to those people who have the ability or even have the work. You don't tax unemployed youths. You don't tax people who don't have means of livelihood. You have to provide for them first. Then, on the other side of the ladder are those who are stupendously rich. Come to Asokoro, come to Metama, you see a lot of structures that are so massive. These are structures worth millions of US dollars. Some of them are not even occupied. The owners, go to Abuja airport, you see count the number of private jets. They outnumber the number of public jets you can find there. If they don't triple them. We are saying that these people should be taxed appropriately. Let the wealthy be taxed appropriately. Let those who have pay more. It's a duty. The government has to have the moral will of the justification, not just the justification. They have to have the political will to tax people appropriately. Those who have, let them pay more. And those who don't have, lessen the burdens on them. How do we lessen the burdens on the common man on the street? How can we make life more meaningful for them? How can we have social protection programs for them that will be all-encompassing, that will not be politically inclined? This is what the conversation should be. And beyond that, before leaving the issue of IMF, I think IMF should now help Nigeria to see how it can see to its, Nigeria is now saddled with so much debt. Debt servicing alone is taking millions and millions of dollars out of the policy. Again, I think IMF should lead the conversation on how Nigeria can stop servicing its debts now as part of COVID-19 recovery strategy towards how the Western world and the Brentwood organizations will be able to forgive the debts. That is how you can help the Nigerians on the streets. Nigerians are having it very tough. And we have what we call the Malabo Declaration of 2014, where we said, okay, by 2025, we are going to have poverty in Nigeria. And we are going to make sure that no Nigeria is hungry anymore. We are talking about 200 million people, and that is just 3 years away. How are we going to achieve that? Is it by now cutting social spending? You have to cut health budget that is 5% instead of being 50%, which is the Abuja Declaration. Are you now asking Nigeria to cut it further to 2%? I don't know. It doesn't make moral sense. It doesn't make humanity sense. And it is not going to be at the interest of Nigerians. And the Nigerian government should have the political will to now say, no, we are not going to take this bet from IMF.
Yeah, but a lot of people would say that perhaps we are putting too much responsibility on the IMF. Why don't we look inwards when you talk about debt servicing, when you talk about tax even, starting from there, the tax that is being paid, are we seeing the benefits of it? Are we seeing it being used as it should be used? Perhaps if that is done, then the issue of infrastructure, which will eventually feed into the economy of individuals and the country as a whole, perhaps this should be areas of consideration even before we start looking at IMF and the World Bank.
Thank you so much. One thing that is very unique about Nigeria is that there's a lot and lots of wastages. The Nigerian government system is way too large. It's way too large. Public consumption is too much. There are so much wastages in the system. There is so much corruption in the system that even the outside world, including IMF and World Bank, will look at us and say, are we really serious about making ends meet for our people? You have a government that is so big. Why can't we reduce the size of the government? Why must a minister come to work with probably 3, 4, 5 cars, all of them driven by drivers, all of them containing aides to aides and aides to special advisor to special advisor to special assistant? These are unnecessary. These are unproductive. Even the countries we look up to, we have their ministers going to work inside the train. They enter the train. For example, I think the Nigerian government need to look at the size of the government. They need to look at the wastages in the system. And it is high time we should make only those who are interested in serving to come into government. But I don't see that happening now. We are not even starting on a good note. If a political party has to ask somebody to pay 185 pounds sterling to pick a nomination form, an application form to be a president. That is too much. That shouldn't be the starting point. In the UK, all you need is just 500 pounds to become an MP. And if you lead your political party and your political party wins, you become the head of government, which is like the president of Nigeria, on your 500 pounds. This is what we are talking about. Are we really ready to get it right? Does the government have the political will to lead us aright? All of us have to start this conversation. We are looking forward to 2023, but we don't seem to be getting it right now from the beginning. We have to make politics and political activities here. We have to make it less attractive. We have to make it a serving. That will be a service to the people, and not a means to an end where people come to misuse the Commonwealth, mismanage the Commonwealth, and in some instances, brazenly steal the Commonwealth.
All right.
And Nigeria continues to go around the same cycle.
All right, Dr. Vincent Anwoze, thank you so much. Country Director of Oxfam. Very hard questions there. You know that Nigerians, both the leaders and the followers, would have to face and answer both individually and as a nation if we really want to move forward, because eventually we cannot place the growth or non-growth of our country on IMF or World Bank. Nigeria is supposed to be able to run its affairs. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. Enjoy the rest of your day.